Hola señores, hoy tenemos que hablar de los verbos reflexivos. Son algunos verbos muy importantes, verbos muy bonitos, te van a gustar. Básicamente un verbo reflexivo es un verbo que tiene el mismo sujeto que el objeto. O sea, el sujeto y el objeto son la misma cosa o la misma persona. En inglés también tenemos verbos reflexivos, pero no son exactamente iguales. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about reflexive verbs. Reflexive verbs are nice verbs. You're going to like reflexive verbs. Reflexive verbs are essentially verbs that have the same subject as the object. Meaning, the subject and the object are the same thing or the same person. To give a basic example, a non-reflexive verb, say to cut, I would use to say, I cut your hair. That's non-reflexive because I'm the subject, as an I, and I'm cutting your hair, so you're the object. A reflexive verb would be, I cut my own hair. Okay? Or, for instance, a non-reflexive verb would be, I wash the dog. A reflexive verb would be, I wash myself. Non-reflexive verb would be, I comb your hair. A reflexive verb would be, I comb my own hair. In Spanish, the way that we work this is that we have a list of reflexive pronouns. The reflexive pronouns are very similar to many of the other pronouns we've seen. 4 of them are the same as the direct and indirect objects, with the slight difference in that the third person pronouns are different. Okay, but we've got these reflexive pronouns that need to accompany the verb at all time with a reflexive verb, and that always need to agree. So for instance, if we're using a first person form of the verb, then we need to make sure that we're using the first person pronoun because of the fact that the subject and object are the same. There are a lot of verbs that make a lot of sense that they're reflexive. For instance, washing oneself, brushing one's own teeth, cutting one's hair, shaving oneself, waking oneself up or getting oneself up, going to bed, i.e. putting oneself to bed. So a lot of these make sense. Some of them can be perhaps not quite as immediately and tangibly sensible. So for instance, to get bored, we think of as a reflexive, it is a reflexive construction because it's this idea of to bore oneself. So that would be a reflexive construction. Oddly, the verb for to leave, one of our verbs for to leave, is a reflexive construction. So the non-reflexive is to go and the reflexive is to leave. So some of them make a little bit less sense than the others. But for those, you just kind of need to learn them as new verbs and understand that they have this meaning. So let's take a look at how it works. So as I mentioned, with reflexive verbs, we're going to have a list of pronouns that we need to use. These pronouns will be me, te, se, nos, os, and se. So as you can see, this is the same, and this is the same, and this is the same, and this is the same as the direct and indirect object pronouns. Obviously, in the beginning, that could cause a little bit of confusion. So it's really important that you study this diligently so as to not become confused among these very similar looking pronouns. These ones are different than what we've seen so far. So, let me show you how this works. If we have a verb like lavarse, okay, so this is what a reflexive verb looks like. A reflexive verb will look like an infinitive verb plus the pronoun se. The pronoun se is attached to it when we see it in the infinitive. Okay, so we've been used to seeing all of our verbs ending in AR, ER, or IR, but reflexive verbs will end in se. So you can look right before the se to figure out if it's an AR, ER, or IR verb. So a verb like lavarse. The verb lavar means to wash. Lavarse, to wash oneself. Okay? Lavarse. So, here's how they work. The verb conjugates just as it always did. And then we include those pronouns that we just looked at a minute ago. So we would say, me lavo. Right? That's our normal conjugation of an AR verb along with the pronoun me. We'd say, te lavas, se lava, nos lavamos, os laváis, and se lava. So as you can see, like I've said, this verb is conjugating like you would totally expect an AR verb to conjugate, but we're including these pronouns here. Notice the pronoun is the same placement as we saw for direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns. It comes before a conjugated verb or after an infinitive. Okay? It could also come after the gerund in the present progressive. So me lavo is I wash myself. Te lavas, you wash yourself. Se lava, he washes himself or she washes himself, or you wash yourself in the formal. Nos lavamos, we wash ourselves. Os laváis, you all wash yourselves. And se lavan, either they wash themselves or you wash yourselves if we're speaking in the ustedes form. What are some other verbs that work like this? We have verbs like afeitarse, to shave oneself. So if I'm shaving the dog or I'm shaving your head, I use the verb afeitar because the subject and the object would not be the same. But if I'm shaving my own face or my own head, I use afeitarse. We've already seen lavarse. Another common one is bañarse, to bathe oneself. Another common one is acostarse. Acostarse means to go to bed. This is an O to UE stem changing verb. We've seen dormir. Dormir means to sleep. Dormirse means to fall asleep. Remember that dormir is also an O to UE. We have despertarse. Despertarse is to wake up. So if we just have the verb despertar, that's the verb I would use if I'm waking somebody else up. Right? If I'm waking up my child, I despertar my child. But if I'm waking up myself, just waking up, we use despertarse. I already mentioned a few minutes ago this one, irse. So irse is to leave. Right? This is just the verb ir in the reflexive. So ir means to go, irse means to leave. That was a little weird, to go oneself. But that's how we say, one of the ways that we say to leave. Some other verbs that work like this. Divertirse means to have fun. That's also an E to IE stem changing verb. For some reason, we're looking at a lot of stem changing verbs here. You can find some more in your book. Some other ones include levantarse, which means to get up. Ponerse, to put on. So poner means to put. Ponerse, to put on oneself. Probarse, to try on. Quitarse, to take off. Sentarse, to sit down. Couple other little points to look at. In looking at the different pronouns, you'll notice that se is the same for the singular and the plural in the third person. This can be a little bit confusing and ambiguous on occasion. However, you can see if the verb is singular, then you know that that se is referring to a singular person. If you see that the verb is in the plural, then that se is referring to a plural person. So for instance, se afeita versus se afeitan. One obviously means either he shaves himself or she shaves herself, or you, in the formal shave yourself. And se afeitan would be they shave themselves, or you shave yourselves in the ustedes form. Okay, so even though that may seem a little bit ambiguous, it's not so much. Any verb in Spanish in which the verb could act upon the subject can be turned into a reflexive verb. So in the book and here you'll find a list of common reflexive verbs, but any verb can be made reflexive. Any verb can be made reflexive. So for instance, in a Stephen King short story I read one time, a sort of a strange horror tale, a man trapped on a desert island ended up eating his leg, which was disgusting. But in that case, you could say, okay, well, we're going to take comer and we're going to make comer a reflexive verb, comerse, because he's eating himself. Okay, it's kind of a disgusting example, my apologies for it, but I think it proves the point that any verb can essentially be made into a reflexive. As long as the subject can act upon, or the verb can act upon the subject, it can be made into a reflexive. But like I said, we do have ones that are commonly used like this. The important part with reflexive verbs is that when you conjugate them, you make sure that the pronoun is always agreeing with the subject and with the verb. And so, me afeito is I shave myself. That's a reflexive. But if I say me afeitas, that's no longer a reflexive verb because the me refers to me and the verb refers to you, afeitas. So that me afeitas would mean you shave me, and that's not a reflexive construction. Okay, so for it to be a reflexive verb, the pronoun and the verb need to be in agreement. The pronoun, the verb, and the subject all need to be in agreement. Okay? Mucha suerte, que lo practique mucho. Nos vemos en la próxima clase. Adiós.